Доброго вечора, ми з України.
Hello, comrades, and welcome back to Ushanka Show, stories about life in the Soviet Union. Здравствуйте, дорогие товарищи! В эфире программа Ushanka Show. I'm your host, Sergei Sputnikov, and back in 1971, I was born in the Soviet Ukraine.
These videos are becoming dull. There are now many of them with less and less quality. The first ones were really great, but now it looks as if what matters is making as many as possible. Less quantity and more quality, please.
If you ever traveled in the Soviet Union and even in the modern day Russia or Ukraine, especially if you traveled by train, you would definitely notice a bunch of these extremely ugly metal buildings that spread all over the place, especially along the railroad tracks. And I actually recall someone asked me that question a long time ago. A person went to Soviet Union back in the day, and he asked, like, Sergey, what's up with those ugly metal buildings? And those were so-called cooperatives гаражи, cooperative garages of the Soviet era. But before we begin talking about Soviet-era car garages, we need to refresh some information about Soviet cars and Soviet car prices. So the average salary in the Soviet Union in the 80s was about 150 rubles per month, and it makes comparison really hard because we reached equality by making salary the same for, like, for example, Soviet engineer or someone who was doing a manual work, and quite often some factory workers would make more money doing manual labor than, for example, like an engineer. But just let's put that number in your mind: 150 rubles per month. Now let's do some basic math. 150 rubles times 12 months, it comes to 1,800 rubles. Maybe they got some premia, so bonus pay of 200 rubles. So average Soviet worker was making 2,000 rubles per year. Okay, and I found this handy table here that shows the prices of cars available in the Soviet Union. So first one is Volga, the most expensive, prestigious car that regular Soviet citizen can purchase. Then they messed it up. Next one should be Zhiguli, but they put it third. So then you got Moskvich, then you got Vaz Zhiguli, and the last one is ZAZ Zaporozhets. What's interesting, if you look from 1961 till 1988, despite the fact that officially we had no inflation in the Soviet Union, definitely there was a steady price increase for all the cars. And of course, models were changing, there were some improvements. But for example, Volga car started from 5,100 rubles back in 1961 and it ended at 16,480 rubles in 1988. So it tripled in price in 20 years. So quite a bit of inflation. But what's even more interesting in this table is the second column. That's how many months an average Soviet citizen had to work in order to purchase the car. So if you're looking about 1984, Volga, the most expensive car that average Soviet citizen can purchase, 93 months, so it's about 7 years. Moskvich or Vaz, about 4 years. And then you got even the cheapest Soviet car, Zaporozhets, about 3 years. So let's try to compare apples to apples, or at least Soviet apples to American oranges. So I looked up an average American engineer's salary in 1984 was around $40,000 a year. So Volga was 7 years worth of your salary. So it puts in a price point of $280,000. That's what you would have to pay if you would have a salary similar to the average Soviet engineer. Now, I don't know what car could you purchase back in 1984 in the United States for $280,000, but definitely you can get way more value than this Volga that had only manual transmission, no air conditioning. There was no bells and no whistles, no power seats, no power windows, just really basic car, and you have to pay $280,000 for it. Or if we take Vaz Zhiguli, which was very popular in Soviet Union after this began production back in 1971, 4 annual salaries, so $160,000 for this small car. Once again, manual transmission, everything manual, windows. I mean, you probably have a cassette player. So what car would you purchase in America for $160,000. Way more, way better car. It would be a luxury car, right? So it's very important for you to understand, because that explains the whole phenomena of the Soviet garages, is how expensive were the Soviet cars. And of course, don't forget another cost, that sometimes people have to wait up to 9 years in order to purchase the car. So car was extremely expensive, and you have to wait for a long time when it's your turn to purchase. So for the average Soviet citizen, a car had as much value as probably some kind of fancy Lamborghini or Rolls Royce. So that's kind of what you need to understand. And here's a funny example of what people had to do if they did not have a garage. In this case, this is Invalidka car, and I made a video about it already. I'll post the link in the comment section. So this car was given for free by the government, and still people had to chain it to prevent it from being stolen. And of course, the most extreme case of I need a garage now happened in Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia. So this person purchased a car. It's a Vaz 06 model. And on the very first night that he parked his brand new car by his building, wheels were stolen and the mirrors were stolen. So the owner got so upset that he hired a crane, and he lifted his car into a modified balcony on the 4th floor of his apartment building. And that car stayed there, as the owner put it, till the better times, for a total of 27 years. And only after he passed away, the new owners of the apartment sold the car and took it down. For 27 years, that Vaz car was sitting on a balcony in an apartment building in Tbilisi. It was like actually a local attraction. Pretty wild story. So now I have a question. Would you leave your Lamborghini parked every day on the street next to your apartment building? Probably not, because this car worth a lot of money. It's worth a lot to you, and you definitely want to have it protected and used only on special occasions. This is why every Soviet town and city had those ugly garage complexes. There was a lot of, not just single one. There was the whole bunch of together. That's why they call cooperative garages, кооперативные гаражи. People were desperate to find a spot and set up the garage so they can park their car, protected from environment, and of course protected from thieves. This garage movement began under Nikita Khrushchev, when back in 1960 there was an executive order issued about organizing garage cooperatives to build and utilize collective garages and parking for the individual car owners. Organizing a cooperative was an interesting way of sidestep the ban for the private property, because in this instance there was no individual owners of garages. Cooperative owned all the garages, and every member of that cooperative had a continuous use permission, so you were allowed continuously use that garage while technically you didn't own it. Some of you may recognize this cooperative idea from my story, how my parents purchased a cooperative apartment, кооперативная квартира. So exactly the same concept. My family never owned that apartment. It was a cooperative property, but we had the right of continuous use of that apartment. And similarly here, people had the right of continuously use the garage, while it was never in their private property. So of course, building garages with this cooperative concept was quite an awkward process. First of all, you need to organize cooperative. Quite often it was done at the places of work. So if it's some large factory, or maybe, for example, there's organization of writers in Kyiv or Moscow, so they will organize the cooperative, garage cooperative of the writers. Then they need to find some territory available, some lot, some land. And once again, you kind of like ask for permission to use that land, because cooperative couldn't purchase. And just from there, you need to find somebody to build the road. Then you start building those garages in the territory. And quite often, the only land was available in big cities is along the railroad tracks, because you couldn't build apartment complexes that close to the railroads. But the garages will be fine, right? Nobody cares about the noise of the train or vibrations. So that's why a lot of these Soviet-era garages, They are located right next to the railroad tracks. Of course, there were also a bunch of limitations. You could be a member only of one garage cooperative. You can only have one garage, period. So a family was allowed to have only one car in private ownership. And it was quite expensive because you had to pay money into cooperative that will be used to build this garage complex. There was also a limit on the size of the garage. So the lot size was 6 meters by 3 meters, so about 20 feet long by 10 feet wide. So that's a pretty small lot. You could barely fit a car. You couldn't even open the door all the way. So that was a pretty small garages, and you could see in the pictures there's hardly any room for anything else. It wasn't cheap to become a member of Garajny Cooperative. Usually you need to pay from 3 to 4,000 rubles. That's the prices of 1970s. So you're paying half of the price of your car. So your car is extremely expensive, right? We talk about, $250,000. Then you need to pay about $120,000 to become a member of this Garajny Cooperative. When you look at the photos of these garage towns, they look like there was a handmade metal boxes, but actually you could purchase a kit from the factory. It wasn't cheap either. I believe it's like 500 rubles. So you pay 3 to 4,000 rubles to become a member of Cooperativny Garage. And then you have to purchase your own garage and assemble it on your lot. One of such garage kits was manufactured and sold at the steel mill at Mariupol. Now I believe everyone knows the name of that Ukrainian town on the shores of Azov Sea. It was called DK2V, and it's such an iconic garage that even now in modern days people make a matchbox size garages to go with your matchbox size Soviet era toy cars. Such a metal garage kit came with 24 wall sections and 16 roof sections, plus some hardware and trusses for the roof. The total weight was 1,500 kilograms, so about 3,300 pounds. And I believe the cost was about 500 rubles. A lot of money. Most of the garages also had the access hole in the ground, so when your car is parked, you can get under it and change oil or do some other minor or major repairs. And some people actually managed to go further and add the whole cellar in their garage so they could store their potatoes and other goodies if they didn't have room in their apartment. Garages also became the spots to hang out for the boys on the weekend, so besides fixing their cars, they also will be having shashliki, cooking some meat, and just some of them even had parties. And remind me this story about a guy that was a mechanic, and he noticed that his neighbor constantly in the garage working on his car every weekend. So one time he came to him, the guy's like, "Hey dude, I'm actually a mechanic and I can help you. I see you struggle fixing your car already for almost 2 years." And the guy replied, "There's nothing wrong with the car. I just hate my family." As I mentioned earlier, technically no one owned a garage. You were just a member of cooperative and you had a permanent right to use the garage. So there was a really interesting way of selling the garage without selling the garage. You find someone who wants it, and then you need to sign off as a member of that cooperative, and a new person will sign in as a new member of cooperative. That way we do that swap, and then cash will exchange hands privately. So just membership will be changed, but in reality there'll be a new owner of the garage. Alright, so I think it's enough for one video. In my next video I'll tell you quite interesting stories about so-called garage finds. So in America they call it barn finds because people have giant barns and they store old cars. In former Soviet Union, now they have so-called garage finds, and when they open abandoned garages or they buy garage unseen, and then they find some interesting cars. So that'll be my next video. So thank you so much for tuning in to Ushanka Show. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please don't forget to like it, and we'll talk to you soon. До свидания. Goodbye.
Sergey wrote a book based on diaries he made when he was first in the United States. And as I understand, this is just volume 1, right?
That's correct.
He's going to have multiple volumes coming out. Well, I said, well, since Sergey is kind enough to come up and speak with us, I bought the book. I said, I might as well read this. I read this in one sitting. 2 hours, 2.5 hours. I just couldn't put it down. It was so fascinating because your writing is very compelling, for one, and his story is very interesting for two. It's really interesting. You know, we've lived here our whole lives. We don't have that perspective. It's just so interesting to hear someone else's perspective about what we take for granted. So I hope you really tune in and listen to what he has to say. It's a very interesting, very informed perspective. Sergey is not a historian. He's an electrical engineer by trade, but I find that he has a depth of understanding on history, economics, culture. So just a very observant fellow and a great storyteller. So like